Good evening, everybody. This is Yehuda Shamroth from Ramat Beit Shemesh, Israel, here to introduce Rabbi Pinchas Winston, who gives us a beautiful shiur every single week out of the kindness of his heart. We learn his Torah and his insights about what's going on in the world through the eyes of the Torah, through the current events as well. Tonight, we're going to be discussing, Rabbi, you're going to tell us what's your topic again? I can't remember the topic.
Is life.
Life, that's right. Something a little insignificant like that. But he's going to help us understand what's going on in our matzav and our situation right now. We just finished our holiday called Tu B'Shvat. There's life. We're going to learn about how to cope with life, how to learn life, how to live life. And the Rabbi, on the heels of our beautiful holiday of the festival of the New Year's of Trees and growth in spring, he's going to teach us how we can renew ourselves as well, I'm sure. Thanks, Rabbi. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, and we have done this for a long time now, and I've discussed a lot of very important ideas, sometimes very deep, sometimes very simple, a combination of things here, back and forth, up and down, and I decided to try to put it together into kind of a course of ideas called life, meaning that to have an overall big picture understanding of everything, period. Like, how we got to be here, why we're here, what we're supposed to accomplish while we're here, and provide the framework to put everything that's happening today into in perspective in terms of the ultimate goals of creation. The amazing thing is that a lot of this information is from Kabbalah, but it's something that everybody has to know. It's something that we all can benefit from, and once you know it, you walk around and how many people are spinning their wheels, doing their thing, day after day. You get up in the morning, you do what you're supposed to do, hopefully, and you go to bed at nighttime. In between, there's a lot of distractions. If you have a family, take care of the kids, financial responsibilities, and people running around. And of course, then a war happens, and the atrocities that took place, and then the kidnapped, the hostages, and the ongoing problem, and increased anti-Semitism, and the absolute ridiculousness of the thinking of the world today, and more every single day resembling, once again, the 1930s, and not just the 1930s, but other times in the past as well, and not again. Like, how does it happen again? When in the 1930s, one of the reasons why people did not realize how far things were going to go was because they thought that mankind had advanced to such a degree that they outgrew anti-Semitism, or at least hostile anti-Semitism, only to find out that it was just more intense than ever before. And then you wake up, and then you all of a sudden realize, too late, that there's so much more going on in history, and how much more so if you're a believer in God and you believe in Torah, and you have to put it onto perspective, because you want that faith to stay intact. A lot of people in the camps, a lot of people in the Holocaust lost their emunah. They lost their way, because it just did not fit into their idea of the God they had grown up with, and they had thought they had lived with, and really there's nothing inconsistent whatsoever, but it all depends upon how deep and how profound your understanding of what's supposed to be accomplished is, and then things start to make more sense as much as possible. But obviously, we can't understand everything in the meantime, but what we can understand, we should understand. What's available to understand, we should make a point of knowing it, because we need it. And even though there's different periods of history where it seems like we don't, like, for example, the 1950s and 1960s, 70s, maybe in the 80s, more conservative times, it was more peaceful. Jews went about their business in the diaspora as if they were accepted, and everything was fine. And then, with Intifada, things began to shift. That was 1987. And all of a sudden, the truth is that even 1982, there were already signs of it. I personally saw signs of it back at that time. But by 1987, with Intifada, when CNN and other of the news stations even paid Palestinians to stage attacks by Israelis, and literally to shift the focus from the Jewish people being the David, who they have always been and even are today, to the Goliath, and the other way around. The Palestinians, they even used slingshots to try to capture that theme of being the underdog and being the David. And the news media, the Western world, helped with that. And eventually what happened, I don't know if people remember it, but you go back at that time, they just began to move into the world of the media and social media, even though the internet was not yet public at that time, not until the 1990s, but they already had the idea of how to switch the thinking of the Western world against Israel. And they couldn't win the physical war, they would win the market and advertising war, so to speak. And it's worked. It's worked tremendously, and we got caught blindsided, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And then, of course, now we're entering a whole new phase. What happened on October 7th, which is the beginning of, not even the beginning, it's already before that, but that sort of accentuated it, made it, brought up more full force, a whole different level of hashgacha pratis, and now the world is like really gone off the deep end, and the way of thinking and the associations and the alignments, it's just not logical. And every day you hear people say, I can't believe it. How can it be? I don't understand. How can they say that? How can they do that? Even Jews, right now are just eating up what they're reading in the media, which is anti-Israel, and having complaints against their own people, siding with the other side because of all the confusion. And these are signs. In the end, when it's all said and done, it doesn't faze God. Nothing shocks God. Nothing is surprising him in any way. He's just moving towards the same goal he had when he made Maisa Bereshis. He's had his thumb on everything, his finger on everything. He's controlling everything, setting up everything. And people running around and saying what they say and doing what they're doing, whatever, that's what they do. But it's just all part of the master plan, and that master plan has not changed a bit at all. It may be a surprise to us. We may be shocked by the direction of history and what's gone on because we're not privy to the future these days. We don't have prophecy, and even the things that would clue us in as to what to expect, most people don't know, not even aware of it the slightest. So I want to try to work against it, to fix that problem, and try to bring out a clearer picture of what this whole thing is about, as much as we're able to know, as much as I'm able to give over, because obviously a lot of information that needs to be put into it, and it could take forever just to do that. But the basic ideas, and starting from the very beginning, and most people don't even know what that beginning is. If you say, what's the beginning? Right, the Chumash, Bereshis, Barakim, Shemaim, Sa'aris. In the beginning, God made the heavens. No, that's well into the history of the world by that point in time, and it doesn't necessarily tell you why God made the world. You have to know at the very beginning. So, the starting point of all of this is knowing. Is knowing that there's a fundamental problem. In as much as God, what we call God, is so intensely spiritual and so infinite that really nothing can exist or coexist at the same time. We shouldn't be here. Nothing should be here. Even layers, there are levels of God's light, we call Orient Soul, for example, and lower levels in the spheres, they shouldn't be here. Because anything, by definition, that has any title to it, any way to be aware of it as an independent existence and body, like God's infinite light, you can say, or Ein Sof, God's infinite light, meaning it has no boundary whatsoever. It's infinite in every direction, but the very fact that you can talk about that means it has some type of tzimtzum, some type of constriction, because otherwise it would just be, and you just couldn't, you couldn't grasp it in any way. You couldn't even grasp the idea that you can't grasp it, because it would be outside any imagination, any possibility. That's why, for example, that the essence of God, what's called the essence of God, for lack of better terminology, is atzmus. And atzmus means like his essence. It's referring to like the very essence of the reality of whatever that being is, whatever, even that's, we don't know. We can't talk about it. It's because there's nothing in human experience, nothing in human intellectual understanding on any level that could possibly give us even a hint, even the slightest hint, is to what his atzmus is. So therefore, we say the word because we have to say something, but we have no idea what it is. All we know is that for some reason, because we're here, right? This is all around. This is, we're experiencing it. For all we know, that God, he wants to share that light. He wants something to know him. That's it. That's everything. All of this, all of history, all of existence, all of the good and all of the bad, all of the sophisticated and all the simple things, from the hugest, galaxies to the smallest microbes. It doesn't make a difference. All of it. I mean, it's unfathomable how much there is to talk about. But all of it only exists because God wants something to be aware of him. And there you have it. That's everything. That's the whole point of existence and creation. Starting point, the will of God, whatever it is. End point, something's going to be aware of God. And the world to come, that's the whole pleasure. The whole thing of the world to come is that awareness. Now, that sounds a little bit boring because we're down in a physical world with physical bodies that only respond to physical stimuli and pleasures and things like that. But the reality is that when we find out what it really is, the body, all the pleasure, as Chazal point out, that 1 hour of Olam Haba is greater than the whole lifetime of pleasure in this world. You can't even come close to it. So you have to wait and see. You can experience it. In the meantime, there are people that do. A person can, by working themselves in that direction, can have little bits and pieces of it and experience it. But the full experience, that's why no one can go and come back and talk about it, because it's just so outside this world. But that's the bottom line, that God made all of this just so something could be aware of him. Now, that's not simple. Why? Because for anything to be aware of God, it has to have some kind of independent existence. It doesn't really exist, but I mean, I exist. Here I am. I'm Mesuyam, head, body, you, everybody else, right? You have your consciousness. I have my consciousness. You know what you know. There's a certain amount of independence we seem to have, but that's impossible with God's light. That's impossible with the reality of God. Impossible. So how does it happen? So the Kabbalah explains God created a concept called Tzimtzum. What does it mean? It means that somehow God is able to do anything, including to will that his light become less intense. But he does it in stages, because it's like ice. You want ice, as long as it's warm in the room, you can't have ice, because the water molecules will evaporate. They'll be in the air. They're there. You can even feel it sometimes, if it's a little humid. But you can't have ice as long as it's hot. You want to make ice, you have to cool the temperature down, and it happens in stages. First, you get condensation, the droplets on the window, for example, and eventually it gets cold enough, and they start to freeze a bit, and you get icicles, and finally you get ice. But it happens in stages. So likewise, the same thing, that for God to be able to make a world in which man could be aware of him, he had to reduce the intensity of his light. That's the concept called Tzimtzum, which is it's a very easy concept to express. It's a very difficult concept to understand, because I can constrict my activities. I can constrict what I eat. I can decide I'm not going to eat this and stop right there. I wish I did more often, but that's what we're supposed to do. That's how we can do that. But how do you constrict infinite light? By definition, and okay, even if you could, how do you do it in only one area where you can make the world, for example, and the rest of the light remains infinite everywhere else? These are equations that we can't really work out. But that's what God had to do. Now, the big question, of course, is, here we are down in this world. The other day, a building collapsed on 21 soldiers, and they were killed from it, right? And all the stories you hear about the hostages, taking place. Terrible. The atrocities are continuing on. It's amazing. Anybody who supports the Hamas, the Palestinians in any way is supporting that, because nobody else would do things like this. An Israeli soldier would never, ever, ever treat Arab hostages the way that they're being treated there. And the only reason why we have to do certain things like take off their clothes and make them travel without that is because they come out dressed in their clothing and then blow themselves up and kill soldiers. They come out with white flags as if they're surrendering and kill Israeli soldiers. They made the situation such that the only way to be secure is to make sure, they might even have swallowed something at some point, but to make sure that they can't hide anything. But if it wasn't for that, we never did that before. We never had to. And we certainly wouldn't do what they're doing down in Gaza. And all of that somehow has to play into this idea that God wants man to be aware of him. We're the being he created, the whole thing. This is what David Melch said. Who is man that you did all of this, all of it? Just a man could exist and be aware of God. That's the goal. Make everything so man in the end could be aware of God. So there's a lot of steps in between, obviously, because look at all of history. Look what's taken place. Look at all the good. Look at all the bad. How does it all feed into this master plan? So the overview is this, and then we're going to explain things in detail because there are a lot of details. Well, after we have this thing called das, right? Das seems to be everything. And how do we know that? Because look what happens in the Garden of Eden, in Gan Eden. When God creates man, he says to man, I have given you all the fruits of the garden. You can have anything you want, seemingly even from the tree of life. He says, only from the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, you cannot eat that fruit, at least not until I tell you. And on the day that you do, you shall surely die. That's what God says. Now, what was the point of that tree? If the point was to test the loyalty of man, how well he can receive instructions and live by them, it doesn't need to be an Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, a tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's not the issue. Just a tree. This tree that I call my special tree, God says, don't eat its fruit. What's it? None of your business. I'm telling you right now, this tree is one I do not want you to partake of. I want to see if you can do it. That would be a test of loyalty, but it's more than that. God says it's an Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, a tree of knowledge of good and evil, because it wasn't just about not eating the tree, not eating the fruit from the tree, because God said so. It had to do with the concept of das. And you see this, because God says after that, right, I've got to bar them from the Eitz Chaim, because they now know the difference between, they know of good and evil now, and they're becoming like us, unless he stretched forth his hand and take from the fruit of the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, and live forever. That itself requires discussion as to what's going on there and why that's such a big deal. But you see, the whole issue is one of das. Das, das, das. That's the whole thing. Look at the world today. It's just an issue of das. Das means knowledge. Das means not. Well, the world has never been more knowledgeable. More people have never known as much knowledge today about the world than they do now. And yet the world is chaotic, down the wrong path, making the wrong decisions, self-destructing once again. It's an amazing thing. We had one world war, two world wars. We're walking down the path to a third world war, God forbid, making the same mistakes, even though we're so much smarter, because it turns out that knowledge is not everything. Knowledge is the beginning of the process, and that's more like daya, factual information. Physicists who knew incredible amounts of knowledge, brilliant people who still struggle with the concept of God, didn't believe it, even though the information in front of them told them that God existed, but they just couldn't see it as much as they knew, because it turns out that knowledge is just the beginning of the concept of das. In fact, in Shemona Esrei, we talk about three levels of knowing, right? Atachanin ladam das. God gives das. Which already question. I thought that was my job. I thought I'm supposed to be the one to go get the Torah and get the books take them off the shelf, read them, listen to a shir. Now online, become a smarter person. But the knowledge in the world. But now it's saying the person. Some people who believe in God are going to be because they're wrong. When God, no. So the Baruch says, it mentions 3 levels after that. Deya, Bina, and Haskell. Sometimes you see Chama bin Das, which is more accurate in the end. But we say Deya, Bina, Haskell. Deya means factual information. Bina means understanding, but Haskell means discernment. Or that's the level of Das. What's the level of Das? That's the level we call wisdom. Wisdom. Knowledge does not necessarily lead to wisdom, but it should. Fresh crossover to turn your knowledge into wisdom. What's the difference between just knowledge and wisdom? Well, knowledge doesn't necessarily affect you emotionally, for all, but it doesn't. You don't identify with it. It's not knowledge that becomes part and parcel of who you are. On the level of Pascal, from the word seichel, on that level, you become one with the knowledge, and that has the power to direct your actions and tell you how to live truth. That's a big step that most people don't take. And it's a gift. It's a gift for a variety of reasons. Because for the most part, you need siyata d'shmai. God has to help you. He's got to work with your thoughts and direct by giving you insights that you need to be able to understand more deeply, more profoundly what you know. Just today working on this material, after working with it for years, knowing the exact same ideas, there was no new piece of information that I was looking at. It was things that I was familiar with and been writing about for years. But there was a certain perspective that emerged and never had before. And really, but it was a game changer. And we'll get to that at some point in time. All because I organize the material differently. Amazing happens when you organize ideas and material. But that's only because of divine providence. That's only because of Hashgacha Pratis, a series of things that had to happen in my personal life that made me have to do certain things that I wouldn't otherwise have done. And because I had to do those things, I was to do like this. And then all of a sudden, boom. And that's how Das works for all of us, for everybody. You may not always realize it, but you often hear people say, I was just the other day, I was talking to someone just downtown. I saw this thing, and a bus went by. That's happened to me a few times, where I was just standing there, spacing out, waiting for a bus, and a bus went by with the advertisement on the side of the bus, and it said something that because of what I was thinking at the exact same time, and this thing and there, all of a sudden, like an idea came that I didn't have before. And God knows it. It's not random. It's not coincident. It's set up. You give a person das. Why is it so important? Why do we need it so badly? Well, take a look at the world. You can see why. There are people who literally, jihad itself means holy war. There's nothing holy about their wars. Nothing at all. They call it holy because they believe it. The Crusades were in the name of God. They went across vast amounts of land on horses and wagons, killed all kinds of people in the name of God. And I can tell you, God kept saying, not in my name, not in my name. Yeah, that's not me, that's you. But they believed because they wanted to believe that they're doing the right thing. Even Hitler, Yamach Shema B'Zichro, said he believed he was doing mankind a favor. He thought at some point in the future, the world would thank him for getting rid of all the Jews because he was a social Darwinist and he believed in survival of the fittest. And the Jewish people believed in helping the poor and taking care of the meek and thinking, that's going to weaken the gene pool. Get rid of the Jews, get rid of that, and we can go right back to being more like the jungle where the strong rule. He believed he was doing a good thing. He didn't call it evil. He didn't think he was doing evil. It's as remarkable as that sounds. You listen to some of these commandants in trial, the Nuremberg trials, your mind is like, what? You have no problem with that? You're talking, you have no problem with that? Just mass killings and butchering and torturing. No, no. They think that they're doing a good thing. That's why you need das. And what's going on right now with the UN and the Hague and even in the American government and you need das. But principally, you need das for what? Well, so that's why if you look, for example, in the Shemona Esrei from Motzei Shabbos, we make 2 Havdalas in Motzei Shabbos. We make one in Shemona Esrei itself, in Atachan and Das, in the Brucha of Das, and we do it later on a coast at home, shul, whatever, with a glass of wine as well. And the Gemara asks the question, where should that Brucha actually be? Where should you put the Atachan and Tanu, right? Where does that go? And the Gemara says it goes in the Brucha of Das. Why? Because without das, you cannot distinguish between the holy and the profane. Without das, you cannot distinguish between good and evil. That's what we're saying this entire time. You need das to be able to do that. Okay, so good. So now we have das to be able to distinguish between good and evil. So what does it help us do? Well, it helps you do the following thing, because once you know what's good and once you know what's evil, you can reject evil and do the good. But by doing the good, what you're doing is you are actually having an impact on creation. You're not just doing good and getting rewarded for it, like in school where you answer the right question or the question with the right answer and you get a check mark. And the world wasn't changed dramatically because of the fact that you gave the right answer. It might be ultimately because it means you're getting smarter and you might become a doctor one day and save people's lives, but it's not like such a dramatic impact just to answer the question. It's just the way things run to become smarter over time. But when a person does the right thing, a person makes a choice, and that's really what you need das for. Everybody has bechira, but in order to be able to use it and use it properly, you need das. That's why, for example, a bar mitzvah boy, a bas mitzvah girl, 12 for a girl and 13 for a boy, they become what's called a bar das. Until the age of 12 and 13, they're not a bar das. It means that they're not really responsible for the things that they do wrong. They're not really punishable. They're in training, so to speak. But at the age of 13 and or 12 for a girl, something magical happens, something mystical happens to become a bar das, literally an owner of das. Now they're supposed to have the power of discernment, even though they're still quite young. But hopefully, if the education was correct and the influences are proper, they will be able to discern good from evil and make the proper decision. And when you do that, something spectacular happens to creation. And that is, you elevate sparks, holy sparks, that we didn't get to how they came into existence in the first place. That goes back to the early stages of creation. But there's this thing called Netzotze Kedusha, holy sparks. And that's what we're doing. I mean, people have heard of this. Many people have heard of this. And they're aware of it, and it even shows up in some of our tefillahs. For example, that if you look at the special tefillah after the Hoshanas and Hoshana Rabbah, you don't find this too often in Siddurim, at least in the Ashkenazim Siddurim. There's one paragraph that most people skip over conveniently, but it mentions this idea of elevating sparks. There are places, in Sfiras HaOmer, also the paragraph that Sfardim at least say, and Hasidim say, after Sfiras HaOmer, the Gra used to say it until he said people don't appreciate what it means, so the Ashkenazim stopped saying it, but they should still understand what's going on by doing Sfiras HaOmer. They're elevating sparks. These holy sparks are spiritual individual packages of light. And every time you elevate a spark, something fantastic happens to creation. And not just that, but each spark that you elevate is like currency. It's spiritual currency. So it's as if you acquired that spiritual currency. Your Alom Haba, your portion of the world to come, is going to be made up of all the sparks that you personally elevated by your free will choices. And free will choice means I decide to do something or not to do something. And if I decide to do something, I decide to do it like this or like this. I could either daven with a little kavat. I decided to daven mincha. That's a free will choice. But I got to shul, and I daven mincha, not as if my life depended upon it, but as if I have an obligation to say these words, and I did it, and I'm finished, I'm done. Punch out. Or I can decide that I am going to try and focus and put more energy, more sparks, bigger portion of what to come. But that's not, that's all part of Tikkun Olam. But what's really going on? What's really happening here? So we notice, as we see, the world is filled with evil. Evil exists, whether it's a fictitious concept that will eventually disappear, or it's real, but it certainly seems real, and we're told to deal with it as if it's real, and we feel the effects of its realness in the. So evil exists, and there's times it's strong, and there's times it's weak. What makes it stronger, and what makes it weaker? Right now, we are unfortunately entering a period of intense evil that's getting stronger every single day. The direction of history is not a positive one right now. Getting stronger every day. It'll eventually all end up for the good, because don't forget, God has his master plan in mind, and we're going towards that. And that's not going to change. We'll all end up being fantastically happy when we finally get to that point. But in the meantime, we're going through a negative period of time, just like the Jews did in Bavel, just like the Jews did in Mitzrayim, just like they did before Yam Suf, just like in this week's Parsha, they get to the water, and the water is bitter. It's not sweet. God's right there. All these miracles have happened for the Jewish people, and yet the water is bitter. It becomes sweet in the end, but it's bitter in the beginning. And then they're attacked by Amalek before Mount Sinai. We see that things get worse before they get better. But it's all part of this master plan of Kadosh Baruch Hu, that he wants someone to be aware of him. That's the bottom line. That's the end game of all of history. So what's with this evil? So it's a spiritual reality, clearly, and it's very infectious. People get it, and it seems to spread to a lot of other people. It doesn't work like germs, but not physically at least, but spiritually it does. And the thing with this evil is that we call the kipas or chitzonim in Kabbalah, is that it also has to live. It's like a bacteria in a sense. It's like an animal, in as much as it might, like a lion, for example. A lion does terrible damage to a human being if it's hungry, or to people, to other animals for that matter. But if the animal doesn't eat, he gets weak, and eventually, even if he wants to eat, he can't. You can watch his prey run right in front of him, but there's no quiet to go after it. So the animal, he has to eat to do his thing. Likewise, the klipas, they have to eat to be able to do their evil. What do they eat? What do they eat? Well, they eat Netzotzi Kedusha, just like we do. We do? We eat Netzotzi, yeah. Every time you eat food, you're eating sparks. It's not the nutrients that keep you alive. Well, yes, it is, but it's not intrinsically the nutrients, but it's the Netzotzi Kedusha inside the nutrients. Different nutrients do different things in your body because they have different types of sparks. Each spark is unique to accomplish a certain thing for the sake of keeping a person healthy, giving the person life. So it's like a bank robber who's got a getaway car, and somebody who's dropping off meals at poor people's houses, big mitzvah. One guy's doing an avera, one guy's doing a mitzvah, and they both end up at the exact same gas station because both cars require gasoline. And there's no gas station for bad guys and one for good guys. They don't use a different type of fuel. They fill up with the same thing. There's only one source of fuel in creation to feed anything, and those are the Netzotzi Kedusha. That is the fuel of creation. Holy sparks. That's everything exists and lives and feeds off holy sparks, the good and the bad. So, in World War II, for example, and every war for that matter, but especially in World War II, one of the main ways to get at the enemy is to cut off their supply line, right? In other words, you can't necessarily go and attack Rommel head on and defeat him because his army's too strong and he might be too clever and crafty and all that. But what you do instead is you cut off. He's far away from home. He's in a foreign country, and he depends upon every war effort depends upon supplies. And in Israel, we had a big problem with this at the beginning of the war, and still probably. But you need the supplies. If you don't feed the soldiers, they can't fight. If you don't have gasoline, the tanks can't drive. And they have trucks and all these different things. They can't drive. If you don't have ammunition, you can't fire bullets. You need these things. So if you cut off the supply line, in effect, you choke the enemy, and eventually they become weakened. You can capture them, you can destroy them. That's what happened in World War II. But here and also in Europe too, with the Germans and Nazis as well. So clearly that's a major strategy in any war, is to cut off the supply line. So when a person does a mitzvah, a person chooses, they use their das to make the proper choice, to be able to find the sparks and then to elevate those sparks, you're taking them away from the klipas. You're cutting off the supply line. The more mitzvahs we do, this is how we defeat evil. The more mitzvahs we do, the more good that we do, there's a very set amount of sparks. You cannot, it's not like it's the same like oil and gold. You can't make new gold. You can't make new silver. You can't make new oil. Whatever is there is there. And now it's a question of getting at it. And if one company finds it or one country finds it, another one can't. It now belongs to the one who found it. So likewise, if the mitzvahs that we do are drawing the Netzotzi Kedusha out from the klipas, we're taking away from them. By definition, we can the klipas, and this is what the Arizal explains in Geula in many places. That's what history is all about. It's just about taking the sparks back out of the klipas, cutting off their supply line, choking them, that they have no source of food and supply to be able to survive. And eventually, when the last spark has left the klipas, they don't even just die like a person who dies and the body's still there. They go poof, they disappear, almost like they never existed. The memory of them will still be there for some time, but they themselves, gone. That's the Messianic era. So I always thought that the whole point was to elevate the sparks, because that's what gives you your reward in the world to come. That's what rectifies the world. And the klipas are like, they happen to be there, let's get rid of them. But I realize now they're not exactly like that. If the goal of creation is just to get to the world to come, if the goal of creation is just that God wants to reward us with incredible pleasure forever in the world to come, then it's only about Netzotzi Kedusha. If the goal is to become rich, right? The goal is a person wants to become a multi billionaire. That's the whole thing. They don't care what they do with their money. That's the whole thing. And anything that can increase their money, that's the goal. And that's what they're going to constantly do. But if the person's getting rich specifically because they want to do good in the world, then they have to find ways to use that money in a very positive way. There's an alternative purpose besides making the money. And now making the money becomes secondary because the whole point of making it, the meaning was just to do good things with it. So if the goal was just to get schar in the Olam Haba, then the conversation could stop right here. What I told you is enough to know. You can go ahead and live your life and do the best you can to fulfill that mandate. And you now know what to do. But we're being told that's not the case. The reward in the world to come is secondary. Because anyhow, that reward, it turns out, is the purpose of all of creation. And that is the revelation of God. That God should be revealed eventually to the world. This is what Zechariah says. On that day, God will be one. His name will be one. The whole world will recognize him, the king of the entire earth. Constant reminders of this idea. That's the goal. Getting schar in the world to come is kind of secondary, but the schar anyhow is the revelation of God. You don't go there and get a paycheck. You get to enjoy God's revelation. And that is the ultimate. Whatever pleasure you're having here, believe it or not, even the illicit pleasures a person might be having, is only because it's an aspect of God in this world. They don't know that. They don't necessarily believe in God. But if it gives you pleasure, especially if it's more long-term, it's because you're experiencing the divine. That's the ultimate pleasure. We'll go a little deeper. This idea later on, we'll see how that plays out in terms of everyday life and people, how they live. But that's the pleasure. So then if that's the case, and all of a sudden you have to ask, the very simple, if the goal is revelation of God, then the only question we need to know is, so what blocks it? Why don't we have it? If the purpose of creation is that God wants to reveal himself, and we're looking at a world where it's not so revealed that people can even doubt his existence and live as if he's not there, then you have to ask the question, so what's blocking it? And that's my job. My job is to get rid of that block. So it turns out that, take a look, what do we call evil? We don't just call it evil. There's a specific name. It's called kipa. Klipot, plural, but kipa. What's a kipa? Well, kipa is a peel. An orange has a kipa, an egg has a kipa, and a heart can have a kipa too. In the case of the orange, the kipa is not a bad thing. The kipa is a good thing because it protects the orange. It has a good smell too, right? But it protects the orange so that it doesn't get damaged, and it keeps the juices inside until you're going to start to eat it. In the case of an egg, same idea. You can't make hard-boiled eggs without the kipa. But in the case of the heart, a klipa is a negative thing. It's a boundary. It's a obstruction. It's what is in between man and God. It's a peel that blocks our vision of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it turns out that the klipa itself, that's what we're after. It's not that we're just trying to elevate sparks and get reward in the world to come. It's not just that. That's the means. But the goal is to get rid of the klipot, to get rid of that peel, that obstruction. Because the moment you do, memela, it comes out. The Rambam actually says this in different terms. The Rambam says that he has talked about the mitzvah love of God. And he says, how does a person come to love and fear God? He says, if a person goes out into the world and takes a look at the world the way Hashem has designed it, and how fantastic and how wise and how brilliant and how beautiful, we bench Hashem, we say b'chein b'chesed rachamim, 3 levels of chesed. His mercy, right? He's got kindness, mercy. He gives us food, kindness that is accessible, ched it's even beautiful, it tastes good, right? He goes a long distance. Just contemplate. You don't have to add anything new to your intellectual vocabulary. Just take the time to appreciate what you already know and already see and take for granted. He says, miyad, immediately you will come to love God. And with the Rambam, anytime he uses a word or doesn't use a word that you think he should use, it's to teach you something. That's how precise the Rambam was when he wrote the Mishnah Torah and other things as well. He has the word miyad, immediately. Why? Just tell me, here's how you come to love God. Why must I know that immediately, if I do this, I will come to love God and want to praise his great name? Because the Rambam is giving you a tremendous insight into all of life. Not just love of God, but all of life. Miyad means it's already there. It's a difference between having to dig a canal to bring water to your field, to irrigate it, and the canal's already there, but it got blocked, got dammed up. To build a canal takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money. It might be a mile long. But if the canal's already there and it's just being dammed up by some garbage or maybe even an actual dam by beavers, just remove the dam and the water's already there. It's already flowing. That's what the Rambam is telling you, that you already have love of God. So why don't I feel it? Because you're blocked because of the klipa. Take away the klipa and immediately you'll feel God. The same thing is true of Geula Hashem, Geula Shechina, the revelation of God. We're looking at it like, well, he's not revealed yet. That's going to happen. That's what Zechariah says. On that day, God will be one, and his name will be one. The whole world will recognize him. But what's going to happen? How's it going to happen? God's going to say, surprise, here I am. Show up, knock on the door. I've been someplace else the entire time, and I came back. No. All of us, it's going to be way more dramatic than that. He's going to lift the veil, and all of a sudden, you're going to see him where he already was the entire time. People think Hester Panim means that God went away. Hester Panim, the hiding of God's face, does not mean he went away. It means he's there, but he blocked your view because we lost the right, the schus. You have to work towards it and fix it to get it back again. It always reminds me of the story, which I love telling, one of Gehazi, of Elisha and Gehazi. I won't go to the whole story this time, but two of them are surrounded by the Aramean army, or Armenian army, whatever it is, army back at that time, and they're completely outnumbered. And Gehazi's panicking, and Elisha's not. And he says to Elisha, but we're so outnumbered. And Elisha says, if only you could see. You know what? Hold on a second. And he doubles to Kosh Baruch and says to Hashem, please open the eyes of the lad that he can see what I can see. And he did. And he looks and he sees the hills are filled with angels ready to pounce on the enemy army and take care of them. Now, will they be stabbed by spiritual swords? It could be a plague. It could be a number of ways. They might die from a physical, something physical that looks quite natural. But if you think about it and you look at it, it shouldn't have happened. But it happened anyhow. It was a nace. It was a miracle. So, wow. He sees was always there the entire time. And that's basically what history is all about. We only scratching the surface of it, right? You need das to be able to have free will so that you can make moral choices to elevate the sparks. You elevate the sparks, you cut off the supply line to the klipas. You weaken the klipas, you increase the revelation of God, and that is the purpose of creation. Now, we just have to see how all of history fits into it. But we're going to find out, right? What's going on right now. Just take a look. We're being broken down. We're being forced. We're stopping. And if it wasn't for this war, just think back to October 6th. Think back to, I remember, I was just thinking, in fact, that, just the week before, at a sukkah, get together, the family and we had no idea this is being planned, but to be carried out. Our lives are like pretty normal, thank God, and we're proud to do, celebrate the holiday of Sukkot and enjoy it, and Simchas Torah and all these things. Then, boom, this thing happens, and we're all shaken up, and the whole world. I've never heard as many people in Chutz La'aretz worried about their condition. Until recently, it was only about Eretz Yisrael. We're not coming there. You guys are the ones with the problem. Over here, we're comfortable. But now people are starting to see otherwise, talk differently because of what's going on. And over here, where we realize, our government failed us. Our army failed us. But we don't understand why. It shouldn't have happened. And that's why people wonder, was there a conspiracy of some sort? No, it's a shkacha pratis, divine providence. Whatever the reason was, it is what it is. It is, whatever took place. But look at the change to us. And when 21 soldiers die like that, look at the change to us and to the world. We're not the same. We're more sensitive. It's more difficult, more painful, but that's the process of growth. That's the process of getting towards that ultimate revelation. We're being just like the Jewish people, for example, when Paro increased the slavery, and they'd go running around looking for straw. And they got to the point where when Moshe came back, they were Kotz Ruach. But it was Dafka because they were Kotz Ruach that the Makos could finally begin and the Jewish people could be freed. Because until that time, their egos were in the way. Until that time, they were too affected by the Egyptian lifestyle. They were too affected by but when they were broken down, back to square one again, all over again, now there was what to build. And that's what's happening right now. We've had a run of it. We've had a tremendously wonderful period of history. We're coming out of it, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. We had our way. We didn't have to think about it. Hashgacha Prati seemed to be, their God was protecting us, and everyone seemed to get along with us. And Israel, for the most part, was doing just fine. But it's been gradually changing. You can go back to the 1980s, and it corresponds to certain dates in the Jewish history calendar, and it corresponds to certain events like the Persian Gulf War and the Russian, the Berlin Wall collapsing. You can tie it all back into the Geula and the Muslim Mashiach. It all fits in perfectly. It's all literally fits into the entire thing. Is so accurate that it's like hard to believe because we don't usually merit to see things so clear cut as it's happening right now, but. Where will it go from this point in time? It all depends what God has in mind. We have to understand what the opportunity is. If the end game is the revelation of God, that's the goal. That's the whole thing, that God can reveal himself to something, to some beings, eventually the entire world. Then we have to do whatever we can to make that revelation possible. It's going to happen anyhow. He doesn't need us for it. Regardless, God's going to do it. The only question is, as we said before, Megal Geshus Alidei Zakai, we have an opportunity to be one of those people who participate in the removal of that obstacle to the revelation of God. And that's what the rest of this program, B'ezras Hashem, will be about. Have a good Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi. And just one quick comment. I heard there was somebody named Yishai Fleischer, who's very prominent in the Dati circles, and he's a very big spokesperson for Israel, lives in Efrat. He said he felt that the reason why this happened, and not anybody gave a reason, but his inclination was that because there was never any God in the picture when it came to the politics of our government and our army and everything else. They just couldn't involve Hashem or Hashgacha Pratis or anything in it. And until we all learn to do that, then we won't have these kind of mishaps. That they were lying. Hashem blinded them maybe to what was happening. Possibly.
Yeah, I honestly, I think I used to also think like that too. But I have to say that since over the years, I've come to realize it's not untrue. It's not untrue, but it's not. it sets. If you really analyze it and you look at the history of the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, there hasn't been much of an opportunity to fix a lot of things. We weren't even aware of some things that had to be fixed as well. It might be part of the whole thing, 100%. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm just saying that we have to understand. We have to go another level with this, more sophisticated. We have to give God his room. We have to understand he has a master plan. What's going on today, regardless of what we ourselves are doing, goes back to my separation. Goes back to before creation. If you want to understand, according to Kabbalah, for example, that the whole thing goes back to what's called Shviras HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels, way before creation ever came into existence. And then all the bad and all the negative and all the death and all the suffering and everything's going today. We didn't know that. We didn't sign up for that. We just came into the world to live a life and hopefully make a meaningful life out of it, like our parents did, and only to find out that some people are blessed to avoid the problem and some people are not blessed to avoid, but it's all been engineered going back. Yeah, what he said, we have to fix up. No question. If it's possible to fix it, we had to fix it up. But I'm saying that I'm not so sure it's the best thing to look for reasons like that, for things like that right now.
Well, then what? And then maybe this will be the next shiur. Like what? Then what do we do? I mean, if not this, then what would we fix?
If you can do it, fantastic. If you can get people to do it, fantastic, 100%. But I have found, for example, that you end up always preaching to the choir, as the expression goes. The people who already believe, who already know it, who already think like that, they listen, they hear. And some change, maybe some don't. The people who need to hear this the most, they don't. They don't listen. They're not interested. There's no one in the government today, for example, who's saying, I hear that, and we should now have a program to put God back into the governments. On the contrary, people go the other direction. Moshe Dayan in 1967, right? People are yelling, God, God, God. And he definitely goes the other direction because people are going, God, God, God. It ends up creating, so it does create a certain amount of birur, like separation, which we'll get to later on as well. It pushes people one way this way, the other way, But what's going on in history right now, I'm telling you, we're going to fall short when it comes to human logic. God himself says, Lo machshvasai kemashvasechem. He says it. He warns us. He says, you have to know, right? You have to trust me because my way of thinking is not your way of thinking. And I know this is what he says to Eov. We spoke about this last week, right? He says to Eov, Eov's trying to make sense of it all. He's trying, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? His wife says to him, just curse God and die already. What's the point? If God, when it was going well, it was great. But now all of a sudden, God turns against you. So what's the point of being around anymore? So Eov says, for someone who serves God for the sake of receiving a reward like you're right. But I don't. I serve God because I love him and I trust him. So when he gave me the good, I was grateful. He took it away. I don't know why. God says, you can't know why. He says, you can't know why. He says to Eov, your whole problem is you're trying to figure it out. Were you there when I founded the earth? Can you do this? Can you fold up the world? He goes two chapters of things that God says, you don't have this much understanding of who I am, what I can do. So the best thing you can do, he says, is make the best of your life given any situation you find yourself in. 100%. If you can do kiruv and you can change people's thinking, you have to. That's your schus. That's your opportunity. But I'm saying that before we start condemning and looking at these situations and that this is the Avera that led to that, I can show you tons of places where the same Avera is taking place and people are prospering just fine.
Okay.
Just
fine. More next week.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a wonderful Shabbat and good Shabbos. And please join us next week. And please tell your friends about this too. And you can watch the replay. It'll be on IsraelTorah.com. Thank you. Have a good Shabbat, everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.